Just going to give Dr. Judy a call. I think we've got her here. There she is.
Yep.
Hello. Happy Thanksgiving.
Something like that. I'm trying to manage kitties. Somebody called and I raced to get to the phone, and then the kitties got in my bedroom, and then
it's a big schmoz.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I shouldn't be moving around like that right now. But anyway.
How are you doing?
Oh, I just, that's not for,
we won't. Just generally.
Yeah, we got an unhappy cat here.
Oh.
You hear him? He and Blue are negotiating.
Oh, how are they doing with that?
Well, you might hear something in a minute. They can get along right well. He hates Blue.
Mm-hmm. Heard about that. Well, hopefully they get along better than the humans.
Yeah.
Just turning something up here. Okay. Oh, we've got the water going.
Yeah. I'm filling up something.
It wouldn't. Okay. I got a phone call, and I'm using my phone for this. It's hard to explain. I don't know why people call me when I'm in the middle of an interview. So here we are again. We've got a couple of people listening in. Somebody wants to know if you rely on or use intuition at all.
Well, what is intuition? I mean, it shows you where to look for evidence, you know.
Uh-huh.
That's sort of like, your experience. Isn't it?
Well, I'd say it's a combination to me. It's a combination of what you already know and kind of going with your gut feeling.
Well, that's based on experience. I mean, it's still, it's how well somebody can incorporate all of their experiences. It's not based on Russian roulette or anything or some thing. It's
okay.
We're really... Okay, I'll run some more water or mute it.
Yeah, okay. So sorry to the audience there. I forgot to change the settings, and I got people coming and trying to call, and it interrupts the stream, so I do apologize. Anyway, Dr. Judy was actually in the middle of explaining her ideas about intuition, and she says it has a lot to do with experience, which I totally agree.
Well, it's being able to incorporate all of your experiences. Mm-hmm. You remember, like the wise old woman or the wise man of the mountain, the big guru everybody goes after, is because they've been able to incorporate their experiences very well, where others just take things as what do you call it? Kind of like rote memory. That's not learning.
Right.
And that's the difference. And most people don't really learn; they just memorize, and they have a knee-jerk, reflex response to things. They don't realize it, but there's certain things they're conditioned to respond to. That's what the media does to you.
And that's what I would say about the idea of intuition, ESP, whatever it is that we're talking about, however we want to put it. Because
it's avoiding the knee-jerk responses and actually incorporating all of your life experiences.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that it's an interesting thing because I think we've actually been told to rely on our feelings, and it's all part of this way that we start to become sensitive ourselves to what other people are saying to us, and it has a whole bunch of other implications.
They tell you what are your emotions. They don't tell you what your feelings. They don't explain that your experiences too. It's like when you're allowed to be upset about this, but not allowed to be upset about that. So they train people to be a certain way.
This kind of goes with what we were just talking about off air. We were talking about an article.
I didn't make it in my room without Yogi.
I'm just going to actually add that. Just a second. Let me just take a boo here. I'm going to try and find that article that we were just listening to or looking at. We were listening as well. There's an audio part. So if anybody wants to tune in, I'll actually put the link into the chat, I think, so that people can follow. That might be the best way to do it. Okay, so hi chat. Okay. I have to figure out how to do 5 things at once, and I'm not really figuring it out too well. Okay, so I just put a link into the chat, and that was the one that we were talking about regarding the TA that was sanctioned. I'm just going to put that up on the screen. And I hadn't heard about it before. But, tell me about...
We could first start with what we were talking about last week, which it ties into this too.
Okay.
This control of public opinion, or groupthink, or what do you call it? Mob rule.
Yes.
And if you can control mob rule, you got it. Just turn everybody into a zombie and then control them with mob rule. You don't have to overcome any logic tests then. And that's what my big concern was about this Roy Moore thing. And also, I would like to reiterate and emphasize again, if you end up in the wrong end of things and somebody does something to you, but you feel that they're too big and powerful above you, file a police report quietly. You can quietly file a police report. You don't have to press charges. It stays on file so that, 40 years in the future, if you want to bring it up, you have a leg to stand on. Otherwise, it can be seen as slander.
There have to be more implications for people actually bringing forward these allegations if they are found to be wrong as well. I think that's part of the issue. I don't know if you heard
and
about
right now
the
there
slush
doesn't
fund.
seem to be like, because you can say, well, you're changing the subject a little bit right now, but you can say that I remembered something, and well, that's just what I remembered. Maybe I remembered it wrong, and the person's off the hook.
I just want to say how that ties in for me is the fact that there's a slush fund and people find out that there's a slush fund and that nobody's going to have to come out and have a public hearing. So that incentivizes both sides, really, to... Right,
but and this deal of, it ends up being a ploy, and that ties into what we're going to talk about this time, is everything becomes a manipulative thing. It's not about truth and honesty. It's about how well you can manipulate the game.
It's kind of
it has nothing about truth anymore. And so that's 20 years ago, somebody saying 40 years ago a judge assaulted me, they would be brought up on slander charges immediately. But now it's used as a political tool. Because there's no ramifications. It's this game that's been played so you just anything goes, and I said that's the difference between a civilized society and barbaric mob rule, and that's an important thing to think about for the betterment of the culture and the whole society. Do you want to go back to Salem witch hunts where anybody can be hung if somebody wants to? And that's what this Judge Moore thing is. It has nothing to do with truths and falsehoods. But if there was such a problem back then, that's when they should have taken care of it. And that's why I'm telling the audience, if you have a situation, put it on record somewhere. Quietly, file a police report, put it in your diary, tell your friend, make a record of it. So it isn't like 40 years later you say, oh, I think I remembered blah, blah, blah. Well, our memories are not like Memorex. And so that's another reason why a lot of things have a 2-year statute of limitations, because people can't remember. But also, suddenly you're going to hire, if it takes only hiring 20 people to say, oh, me too. Yeah, and a slush fund, they can participate, like this Cosby thing, that there was something like $10 million to split up for whoever showed up and signed on and said, me too. but none of those could stand up in court because they weren't prosecutable. None of them were, except for the one that happened to have a 12-year statute of limitations, and they filed it on the 11th hour after they already dismissed the case.
I think it would be probably, I as much as I know that you're passionate about the Cosby case, it is going on right now. So they are in the middle of it. So I'm kind of.
But still, it's about the same thing. It's about how can you convince people with some kind of mob rule rather than a rule of law, and because otherwise no one has any protection against this mob rule kind of thing.
Right.
And I speak strongly about it because of what happened with me with the truthers business. Mm-hmm. The truthers don't have a leg to stand on, but they're allowed to cover up the truth by this mob rule, and directed by somebody who has who has an interest in covering up the truth. And who's dishonest about it? Yeah, and so if that can happen, it's it's just me. I don't have a whole bunch of lawyers to hire. If there's some hungry lawyers out there who want to go after these guys for slander, go for it. It's about what kind of a society we want: mob rule or a civilized society, and that's what it comes down to. Not like you think this case and that case, but you got to have some kind of rules. And the reason why we have, bankruptcy is so that people can start over and have something left of their life, instead of being in debtor's prison for the rest of their life and having nothing of a life because they accidentally signed the wrong thing. They signed into student loans. They didn't realize what they were signing into, and various other gimmicks that go on. And so I like to think in terms of what's best for a society rather than, mob rule. And again, you can always quietly file a police report. Just puts it on record with the time and date stamp on it of what you said when. And I think that's an important thing for folks to know. All right. Said my piece.
Well, that's good. I think it's really
but how it compares to what's going on now, this is more the same. It's trying to control things by mob rule, and they have these buzzwords that people are trying to respond to. Somebody's offended, or what do they call them? Trigger words. All these, and this, this hurt me, this bothered me. Whatever happened to sticks and stones can break my, and
that's the thing. We're creating a whole culture, not just a generation, because a lot of people say it's a generation. I say it goes across all generational lines. It's just this speech that we're using that somehow insinuates that when we disagree with one another, we have to then call the other person a racist or a homophobe.
Racist, homophobe.
Yep. You name it, Nazi.
Yep,
the list goes on.
Climate change denier, Holocaust denier.
Yeah.
All those things were coming up.
Theorist, that's
black helicopters. Then they throw in things that they want people to shun from, like there's people who think of or worried about black helicopters and one world government. Yeah. Wait. Mm-hmm. So that right there. Oh, you don't want to talk about one world government because you might be thought of as one of those lunatics who worries about black helicopters. Mm-hmm. They package things like that to steer public opinion. Mm-hmm. Yes. Just like with my work, the truthers, led by Stephen Jones, referred to as space beams, laser beams from outer space. There's nothing about my work that's about laser beams from outer space. And how can you have lack of high heat with laser beams? It's just contradictory. But that worked in directing people away from, because it sounded like, aliens with laser beams from outer space. Oh yeah, she must be a lunatic. So that directs people away from looking at the evidence.
That seems to be the quest, really, is to distract. We've talked about this before, the Magic Act, and to talk about something over here while we're actually deflecting from the real situation, and I think that's happening all over the place. I actually think that all of this is quite orchestrated, this sex scandal thing, but that's just my particular.
Oh no, it's it doesn't come out of the woodwork just like all of a sudden like that.
I don't think it does.
It's just like my beef with Michelle Obama several years ago. She went to an Indian reservation, was speaking to elementary school kids, like fourth graders, and telling them how horrible the United States is, and how they stole their medicine, they stole their land, they stole their form of government, and aren't American citizens bad. This is the wife of the current president of the United States saying that, current then. That's sort of treasonous in ways. What it's doing, though, is planting a seed so that when those kids become high school kids, they'll probably want to go mow down any blonde-haired, blue-eyed person, thinking that it lights a fuse of anger and hostility towards other people.
Exactly, and this is the thing. It's that word "fomented" is really applicable in this situation, because we've got people in the background. Name them if you want, but I just say that it's clear that there are entities at work in the background that are fomenting this kind of civil war.
Yeah, stoking it. Yeah, it's trying to stoke it.
And this is how civil war is created.
Just like you better not be caught saying you like Trump, because you'll get your house painted or teepeed or something, or worse. It becomes, and that's another way of controlling the mob. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And or he's a homophobe. He's a homophobe. He's a this. Somebody's a this and a that. They don't look at the evidence and see the evidence is to the contrary. And that's the mob rule part. He's a witch. Yeah,
well, it takes a lot of courage these days to actually come out and say that you agree with certain policies. And I try to be as specific as possible when people are talking about North Korea.
Oh, but I don't agree with all of their policies. It's amazing people have to say that. But I don't agree with everything. It's like, please don't shoot me.
Exactly.
You can't say I agree with that sentence. Oh, but I don't agree with everything they say.
I said exactly that. It's embarrassing. But I was talking to a friend who happens to be a lawyer, and he could not believe that I would have anything positive to say about Trump. I was actually talking about an issue, and he had to then put it together with Trump, for one thing. And I was trying to make some sense.
It's about
but it was and he said, it's all about, I'm just really disgusted with you, or I'm really surprised by this, and, I'm just shocked.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with discussing the evidence. Right, so it has nothing to do with discussing the evidence. It's all about how to play the game, how to manipulate to a big extent. I'd love for you to ask him, Trump said 2 + 2 is 4. Do you agree with him or not? Mm-hmm.
Well.
You agree with Trump?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's a really good model. May I just say that FL Peach 4S did miss part of things because I kind of screwed up on things. Ironically, I was accepting a phone, or somebody was phoning me that was trying to discuss that very issue. Anyway, she said she was the one that asked about intuition, and she didn't quite get the answer because of all the schmozzle at the top of the show. So do you want to just recap what you said?
Well, first, I wonder if it's what kind of a loaded question it is, but I say intuition is using your experiences, whether they're explicit or accumulated sense of things. Like for example, if someone says don't listen to this person, they're a racist, homophobe, whatever, and from your experience you can say better go at least see what that person has to say. Why am I being steered away from them? That's, you can call it intuition, you can call it, experience, whatnot, but there's also much more subtle things that you don't recall having learned, but that come forward. That's, you could call that intuition, too. There's a particular picture I put in my book that Stephen Jones used to hold up and say, see, molten metal in the streets, molten metal in the streets. And I was wondering why on earth he was saying that. First of all, it's not flat, so it's not a lake. There's papers that are unburned but are glowing. and there's aluminum cladding that appears to be glowing at one end. And then, that was the key. People would get this knee-jerk response. He was training people like with flashcards. People see the picture, they say molten metal in the streets. They don't look at what's actually in the picture. But my intuition was, you could say intuition was that there's something he doesn't want us to see in that picture, from the get-go, when he was sort of brainwashing people into, there's also an image of dustification of the spire thing. Before the spire dustifies, the whole thing is frothing up. That remaining column of floors that's about 700 feet tall. He made a high contrast image of it. He showed in a slide presentation, and so you have bright lights and dark areas. He says, "See, thermite, thermite, thermite," so that you don't notice what's there. He just dialed up the contrast, so you get white spots at different places. Andrew picked up on that. That was pretty cool.
Andrew's a clever guy. For those that don't know who we're talking about, that's Andrew Johnson, and his website is checktheevidence.com, just in case we want to give credit where credit's due.
Oh, yeah. But it's this idea of, if he's pointing at something wait, let me take a look at the picture for myself. Wait, why is the contrast cranked up? And you start having other questions. And that comes from experience or intuition, whatever you want to call that. It's like something ain't right here. You can't put your finger on it, but you feel like you're being railroaded someplace else. There's a lot of things, and those are simple things, but if you are used to looking at evidence and only looking at evidence, not paying attention to what the TV is telling you, then it becomes a lot easier. But if you grow up listening to a TV set, what the TV tells you to think, then you might think it's more mysterious, like some magical intuition, ESP or whatnot. But people do have a sense that I think, one of the things I like to complain about is smoke alarms. I smelled smoke, but my smoke alarm didn't go off, so the house must not be on fire. That kind of thinking. And that's what this...
that's a really good one. I like that.
There is cases like that, that people override their senses. And, getting back to something normal, where like getting out in the woods or whatever on a regular basis, where you know what reality is, away from cell phones, away from everything else, and get used to perceiving the world around you instead of being told what's around you.
That's so important, and I think that's exactly what those that are trying to control the narrative don't want us to do. And they certainly don't want us getting into conversations with people that might have firsthand information, like yourself, people who have done the investigation, who have evidence, which is, I'm talking about in every realm. We want to be able to get the information straight from the horse's mouth, and that's what YouTube is actually allowing us to do, even with shows like this, so that people can ask questions, they can have interactions with people who actually have the answers, and they're not being interpreted through a third person.
Right, and or they're getting away from the knee-jerk response of what they expect. And a perfect example of that is these folks who saw the California wildfires say, "Oh, just like what happened to the World Trade Center, it must have been a DEW weapon, Again, I'm not saying what it was. You have to study the evidence to determine what happened.
Can you
thoroughly know?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but can you mention what you said to me? We were talking a little bit about some of the fact that there's a lot of towers out there, that sort of thing. You know what I'm talking about, I think. Well, as far as the wildfires is concerned.
But the people who just see one thing in common and decide that that's it, because it's this knee-jerk flashcard response. It's not thinking. It's just, jumping to an answer. I got the answer. Answer to what? You have to first determine what happened. And it has been enough time. I studied the World Trade Center for years. Every detail of it. and let the evidence speak. I don't start out, playing spin the dial and name that weapon. That is what it's about. It's about what the evidence shows. But yeah, I think the first thing I asked you was, was there unburned paper, fluttering around? Did everything turn to dust and the dust go up?
I was talking about the paper too. I wanted to, I wanted people to look at that because they're not looking at every piece of the evidence. And to me, the fact that there wasn't unburned paper.
There was a white car parked
huge.
in front of that house, and the last time I saw a white car parked in front of a house, the person was murdered. So therefore, you murdered that person. That you murdered somebody else because you have a white car. It's idiot comparisons like that. They don't realize it isn't just about guessing an answer. You need to read all of my book and see there's a whole lot of evidence that leads to that. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to just follow the evidence. And with the California wildfires, again, I'm not saying what it was. I'm just saying you got to study it. You can't just, and you discredit all the work I did for years and years and years in the World Trade Center by, in one instance, saying, oh, yeah, just like the World Trade Center. No, it isn't just like it, because you don't have everything dustifying with unburned papers fluttering around. And you don't have people walking out looking at blue sky above them. Oh, yeah, and in Stairway B, some people were making it down. There was 13 firefighters and 1 civilian. There's actually 2 more above where they were. But they were making their way down. They got to like the 3rd and 4th floor, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floor, when the building came apart. And they thought they're goners, and they were amazed they survived, and they thought they're buried under 110 stories of rubble. And then when the dust cleared, they looked up and saw blue sky, and they walked out on their own. All of them. Mm-hmm. Of those 14. And there was 2 more that survived above that area, up where the building didn't even survive. Like 22nd floor. And so how do you, they obviously weren't crushed, and they obviously weren't burned up. I think that's the best evidence.
Right.
If you burned out, you wouldn't be, nobody complained about heat. They didn't complain about having been crushed to death. And so compare that now to the California wildfires. Did you have people walk out of their houses and look up or stay in their house and look up to blue sky? So it wasn't the same thing. Mm-hmm. What it was, who knows? And you did some great work on looking up the Australian brush fires, that got out of control, and they caught people by surprise and burned up families in their houses. If it hasn't rained for a long time and it's real dry, fires move fast, and it's a high wind. You can say, oh, weather control that caused the high wind. I won't, I don't have the data to compare that, but there was high wind for whatever reason. And that's like fanning a fire. But it's normal in California to have lightning strikes and causing. But actually, there's some seeds, tree seeds, they can't germinate unless they've been in a fire. So
this is something interesting too, and I don't know if people understand the history of fire. I don't understand it all, but I do know that there was a fire apparently about 400 years ago, and I wasn't there, so I can't say. But what I do hear is that there was a fire that went right up the California coast through Oregon and Washington, right up to where I live, which is near Vancouver, and it wiped out most of the trees, and the evidence is that those trees that are here, which we called old growth, are actually only about 400 years old. So there is a natural phenomenon that takes place, as you say, for various reasons in nature too. Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of things. I'm not saying, again, just like, I don't agree with everything they say. I'm not saying what did or didn't happen. I'm just saying you have to, it isn't the exact same thing as the World Trade Center. We can rule that out. It isn't, nor is it laser beams from outer space. But the idea of just jumping to an answer, it shows an inability to problem solve. And that is actually by design. Our culture is we were talking last time about how do you feel about 2 + 2 is 4? Is that a good answer? And pretty soon you're relying on emotions. And that's that way they can create, because movies are, as you I'm sure well know, are about creating an emotional atmosphere and bring up certain emotions in people. And if you can do that, if you can do that, then and you have people trained to make decisions based on emotion, man, you've got full control.
True.
We need to have a bit of Spock in us.
Yes. Well, I think you might have an inordinate amount of Spock in you, and just the fact that you've had a background with, I think, parents too that were involved in science and various things that other people may not have. That I have to attribute some of it to the environment as well.
But also, if your toys are broken, you don't get a new one. You have to go fix your old one.
In your family,
or actually, I wanted a Chatty Cathy doll, and finally I found one. It was thrown away in somebody's trash can, and they couldn't complain if I took it out of their trash, and also I wouldn't get in trouble for breaking it if it was already broken and somebody throwing it away. So I got to take it apart and see how it worked, and that was one of the best toys ever. And poor kids nowadays get these microchips in their toys, and you can't fix those.
Yeah. For those that don't know about Chatty Cathy, she had a string, and you pull the string, and I'm thinking that maybe there was something inside that went around, maybe like a little record player.
That's what it was. It was a little record player, and the stylus had popped off the thing. Is why it was broken. I just put it back on, and it worked. So I apparently threw the doll down hard, and that's knocked it off. But it's like a little mini record player. It was bright yellow, I remember.
Well, you've answered a question for me too, because I had an hypothesis, but I didn't actually test it. Never did take my niece's Chatty Cathy apart.
Isn't that a great toy to be able to see how that works?
Oh, it's amazing. And there were all sorts of toys in our era that were like that. You pulled the string and they talked magically. Yes.
And they're mechanical, so you could, if you wanted to take them apart and see how they worked, you could.
Well, that's a really good illustration, because I think people are lacking that kind of curiosity because it's beyond them. I'm like that with a vehicle. That's why I drive an old vehicle, because I want to know how it works. And the new ones are just beyond me, computers and such.
Yeah, push this button and just plug it into a computer to tell you what knob to turn. You don't get to figure it out. As we used to say when I was in high school, that the only kids who had cars were the ones that knew how to fix cars. Because the only ones they could afford. Mommy and Daddy didn't give them a Porsche or something, or BMW drive at high school. They had this, those kind of things. They put gas pedals on that looked like a barefoot, and they'd ham it up, however, and that was great fun for them.
That's kind of what I do, although I don't have the barefoot. I've got a Ford F-250. That's hard to say. Ford F-250, and it's Buck the truck. And sometimes I have to look there. I'm always opening up the lid and taking a look inside, and people are just wondering what I'm looking at. And I'm thinking, well, there's a motor in there, and I can figure out the oil and whether the coolant needs filling up and that sort of thing. But I think this is all part of the whole picture here. People are getting their news from media outlets that are not necessarily telling them accurate facts, or they're leaving out facts. There's a school system
people are dependent on just believing stuff like rote memory, flashcards. And there's few people who are thinking. And the ones who are thinking, others may see that as some magical ability. And actually, people probably had more abilities before. Let's talk about elephants. Elephants can communicate, I don't know how many miles away, 100 miles or so, but they at least 40 miles. But they can also relay messages. There's elephants that came from 200 miles away to a guy's funeral, and they had to have started moving before the guy died. In other words, elephants told their buddies who told their buddies, it wasn't a direct thing, but I think it's at least 40 miles that they can communicate by stomping on the ground, kind of like smoke signals. Now imagine, you can call it intuition because you don't understand where their information is coming from. But, or even, chickens have a language. That's air raid. Better, freeze in place, or you don't have time to run for cover. There's another one that you run for cover. Yeah, and I'm just amazed that they're born with that language, that they just know. When somebody says that, they know that there's a hawk overhead.
Yeah, it's similar to getting out in nature, being a little bit more attuned to animals.
Exactly.
And we used to care for animals. We used to have to go out and milk the cow and get our own milk, and there was a continuum there between the animal and where we got our food from, that sort of thing. And I think all of these things are missing, and if you take all of this as a whole, it's no wonder that people don't have the ability to think for themselves.
Yeah, like that comment last week by the guest who was noting about chickens. They'd stop laying eggs if you scare them.
Right.
Yes. If you bring in a backhoe and start digging in their pen today, tomorrow you probably won't get too many eggs, or the day after. It's like a 24-hour lag.
Right.
But think about that with people too. Mm-hmm. There's certain things that make sense. It isn't that they stop and think about it. It's that they just know these things.
Right.
But
there's a question also.
Okay.
I'm just going to. Sorry, do you want to carry on with that, or can I ask?
No, that was it. It was again just another sample of seeing how nature works, and using information, not just say, oh, that's just a dumb whatever, because that's all I was taught. Mm-hmm. So therefore the chicken can't be able to think beyond that because it's just a dumb animal. Right. Instead, be amazed at just 21 days this egg hatches, and this thing it comes pre-programmed with all this understanding.
It's phenomenal.
It is.
I find all that stuff totally phenomenal. And having had a lot of kids myself, I think 9 months for a human being, it's crazy. It goes from a wee tiny microscopic thing to this fully grown human being. Well, not
and
fully grown,
obviously. And a lot of things are somewhat programmed into it. It knows to cry when it's uncomfortable or needs something. Mm-hmm. And there's also another thing about dogs, cats too, but less. It's less been noticed. It's been noticed less. But a dog, if they put a camera and a constantly recording camera watching the dog, when the owner is starting to come home, not at a regular time, but just whenever, just leaving the door of their office 10 miles away, the dog knows.
I just saw something. I was listening.
The dog starts getting excited.
Dogs are amazing. There was this, I think it was a Dateline something or other, but it was on YouTube, so I never pay attention to what show it is, but I just thought, oh, this is interesting. Dog, rescues owner. And it was amazing because this dog, it was just like Lassie, where finally, after all these days where she was just about dead, she was a runner, and she'd fallen off of a cliff, and the dog gave her warmth for the first couple of nights, and then it realized, okay, she's in real trouble, and went out to find other people. And there's this whole confluence of events. But the thing is, the dog was stopping when the people found the dog would stop and then start again and basically go, come this way. I mean, it was phenomenal. And when they said it was absolutely impossible in a certain way that the dog could have gone back and found exactly where this was. And yet, the dogs are phenomenal. And somebody else's, who's Extremophile 911 says bacteria has a language, it says of me, but I'm not of its own, and that's how it signals luminescence and volume. So there's a lot of things in nature that actually have some pretty intrinsic languages and communication systems that we can't even imagine.
And it's very interesting to note these things. And I think the more things like that you notice, the more in tune you are with the environment. Mm-hmm. Like on 9/11, watching the TV set, and they're talking about a collapse, and I look away and say, what would a collapse look like? Look back, nope, doesn't look like that. So then I shut off my ears because whatever they're saying is nonsense. So I'm like, what the heck is that? And see this building frothing up, and so learning when to shut off your ears, because you instead of just being in a trance and just taking in what they're telling you.
Yes. Now, there's a question, that I was going to pose a bit earlier. Have you studied the Oklahoma City bombing? Does it look similar to what happened to Building? She says Building 6, but I think she means Building 7.
No, 6. It's similar to Building 6. Yeah, there's one story difference, and the only difference in the pictures, and I think I've got a picture on my website, it's like one has wheat checks at the bottom, one doesn't. Building 6 had this big void in the middle of it, this big hole, and it was kind of scallop shaped, and same with the Oklahoma City building. And I could say this much. I'm not trying to jump to any answers, but say you got to explain to me how a bomb doesn't make a spherical damage. It makes cylindrical damage at some distance away from it. There are cylindrical cutouts in the building, the height of the building in Oklahoma City. Now, how does a fertilizer bomb in the street do that? Somebody has some explaining to do. Also, how does it toast cars a block or two away?
Exactly, yeah.
There's things like that are pretty obvious. And also, it's interesting, they have a water, memorial, just like they have at the WTC. Water does something with ions. So that's kind of interesting coincidence. So we can say what we know.
Were you aware of that at the time, or have you just taken a look at it in retrospect?
Oh no, I've since the beginning of my website, I had an image on there and said which is which. Hint. One of them has wheat checks at the bottom, the other one doesn't.
Right.
It's Building 6 in the inside view. You count up all 9 stories, and then there's the Oklahoma City building, and I've got pictures of the roof on it. There's scallop-shaped cutouts in it. So somebody has some explaining to do there.
They do. I don't think they're going to be explaining. Something tells me in a few years.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
So,
but see, just speculating doesn't get you further. But these things I did notice, and there's no obvious report like there is from the WTC buildings. That report furnished a lot of evidence, and they may not have made the right conclusions, but back then the Smith-Mundt Act was still in effect, and they couldn't Photoshop data. They could ignore it and not know what to think of it, make the wrong conclusions, but they couldn't make up stuff.
Right.
But we didn't have that with the Pentagon. We didn't have that kind of data with Oklahoma City. Then there's other buildings too that have the same kind of mysterious effects where the building was just sliced in half, and half is gone. Gone. Right. And the other half is there. And if you use binoculars, you can see what's on somebody's desk. Hey, maybe it was a tornado.
Yeah. And there's
Speaking
also
of which,
bridges that seem to have some of the same characteristics as well.
Oh, yeah, that
Minnesota
Minnesota bridge.
Sorry, where was
Minnesota
that?
bridge.
Minnesota.
Yep, I saw that right afterwards, and it had a weird smell to it too. But yeah, the bridge hopped up and went down, horizontally, so that the cars stayed on the bridge and people got out of their cars at the bottom. Imagine all 12 supports failing at the exact same moment.
Yeah, it's weird, eh?
And half the bridge was closed for work on it, where a week before the whole bridge was open. So they only had half the load. And they claimed it was pigeon poop. Okay.
I did not know that.
Yeah, they said it was pigeon poop that just eroded through. At all 12 supports the exact same moment. Yeah, the bridge ended up, there's a surveillance video I have of it where, the bridge kind of hops up and then goes down, all horizontally. Oh, and there were toasted cars there.
That's always the thing that I notice when you've got these kind of phenomena. It's the toasted cars. and people don't seem to want to talk about things like that.
It's
there's a
not
very
burnt
specific,
cars. It's different. Yeah, it's
toasted.
yeah. You don't have flame marks. Like lapping up the side. Like if you've seen pictures of the toasted bus that was on West Broadway, then you realize there's no scorch marks lapping up the side of it. Like, so what happened? That's what really grabbed my attention when I first saw it. Like, where are the scorch marks? How do you get the roof collapsing down? And it eventually did. It's like the material just came apart. But burnt cars, who've been on fire, they have scorch marks.
Right.
It looks kind of calico.
Mm-hmm. And they're not missing all of the windows and maybe even the engines. Right. I think there's some engine blocks missing there. Those are pretty heavy.
Yeah, or whatever it's missing, whether whatever the part is, it was a very consistent pattern.
Right.
And how do you explain?
System.
Yeah, and how do you explain this not necessarily electrical system? How do you explain these toasted cars some distance from the World Trade Center building with a sea of unburned paper in between?
Right. When I said electrical system, I meant the door locks and that sort of thing. The electronics is that a consistent thing?
No, I don't know anything about the. I don't know anything about the door locks or anything about electronics, but the latches, the metal. Something was material specific, and that's another thing. Fires usually aren't. They may burn something more easily than something else, but they scorch something in the process. But we had this vehicle with unburned seatbelt.
Right.
Yeah, it was pretty weird.
Yeah. That's
but the bright work all around the window was gone.
Yes. And okay, now there's something about the tires, and I don't have the book in front of me, so tell me, there is something that's different than if the cars were to be burned.
Well, one thing, a pattern I noticed is that, cars are up on, why did were the cars affected, not signpost? Well, the signpost is potted in the cement and into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Cars are up on rubber tires. So if they're building up a charge from the environment, from the atmosphere, they can't discharge it as fast as like a signpost. It's in the ground. It's grounded. It's going to discharge pretty fast. Mm-hmm. Just like I think that's why tornadoes like trailer parks, because they're not as well grounded. I'm not saying they're not grounded. It's just they're not as well grounded. Like they're up on something off the ground with some grounding wires, but they're not potted in the ground.
I find tornadoes really fascinating, and particularly in relation to some of the dynamics of what we're talking about on 9/11 and this phenomenon,
exactly.
Whatever it is.
Exactly.
Because most people think, if you've watched the Wizard of Oz, you think, well, Dorothy got swept up. The house got swept up by the wind. But in fact, it's an electromagnetic field, as I understand it.
Well, not necessarily. You can just say you don't have to know how it did it. You just know that it did it. That's thing like those flying trucks and stuff. But if people have trouble understanding, any need to know the name of the technology or something on 9/11. I said, well, you think that after all this time we've had tornadoes that the military hasn't weaponized them? And this ARA even bragged about it on their website. There was some videos there studying how to make tornadoes, start them and stop them.
It's the fact that you're using I don't know how to put this because I'm not a scientist, but I'm thinking the dynamics of the tornado itself in ways that are nefarious, I think. When we talk about magnetic
anybody
fields,
can think about it. When I first realized there was a hurricane in the neighborhood, and I was thinking, okay, what can hurricanes do? And then let's look at the structure of them. You have moist air going round and round and round and round. Well, moist air is conductive. Okay, let's think of getting a wire wrap around and round and round and round a long pole, basically a Tesla coil with a big blade on top. So Tesla coils produce a static environment around them. Well, gee, so do hurricanes. And that's why birds know to head for cover for hurricanes coming. They sense the static environment, static field. And I'm sure there's also a kind of a field effect ahead of a tornado. I've felt it myself. It's like you can smell it or feel. You know there's a tornado about to happen, and it went ahead to the southwest corner of your basement, or whatever. In the Midwest,
corner.
in the Midwest, it was always the southwest corner of your basement you headed to.
Do they come from the northeast, or what's the deal?
No, it's southwest. So if you're upstream from it, if it's coming towards you, you want to be at the closest end because that's the strongest, because the stuff's going to get torn down at an angle.
Wow, things I don't know. Could fill a book. Well, I'm just looking at this, and somebody said that those pigeons must have been, well, they said, what are those pigeons eating, actually, is the question. The ones that knocked down the bridge. So...
the pigeon poop, yeah. They're eating...
lead.
They're eating, thermite or something. Except it didn't burn.
Hey,
I thought that Stephen Jones was going to roll out thermite for that. But he didn't.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Now, do other people actually notice this about things like the bridges that are mysteriously coming apart?
Yeah, they probably are, like I was at the beginning of the days after 9/11. You start talking to colleagues and they shut down. And then you realize, okay, NIST is going to have, you're going to do a study on this. Okay, the grown-ups are taking care of it. I should do my work instead of their work. Let the grown-ups take care of it. And then pretty soon you realize they aren't going to take care of it. And that became the difference when I realized, whose job is it to deal with this, to find out what happened. It's our world. So it's our responsibility to take care of it, and saying, my job isn't going to fix it. But most people probably, if you're really wired into, I got to win my next legal case, or we're going to, got this on the production line coming out, you're absorbed with your job. And my job happened to be forensic engineering, in academia. And so that's why I couldn't help but notice this.
So basically what you were doing was looking at the engineering and deconstructing it, as it were, taking a look at
of anything. Of anything. That was my job, of anything.
The images
it wasn't like
as well.
No, you're getting ahead of things.
Sorry.
I'm talking about, even though it wasn't my job, that is very closely related to my job enough so that I noticed it. But there's not a lot of people with my qualifications who are, engineering, mechanics, materials engineering, science, forensic engineers. There's not a lot of those. And if somebody is, like you say, running an assembly line, or selling new cars at a car lot, or selling houses, whatever they're doing, they're absorbed into that, and this doesn't intersect with their world. But when it's like I just okay, the grown-ups are going to take care of their do their job, but they're not. And I couldn't walk away.
You've paid a huge price for not walking away in a lot of ways, because you've given up your academic career over all of this.
But it's allowed me to see, more of life. Life is just a set of experiences, so I've got a lot more life than anybody know, and it allows me to see outside of it in more easily, and just how people are so into the rut. They're busy thinking about getting in their next proposal, organizing a new course they're going to teach, and that's what they're doing.
Well, keep people busy. I mean, it's like the average Joe too has to go out and work and come home, look after the family.
No, and you don't have time to. Yeah, you don't have time to sleep.
No.
And if you do have any time, you're gonna go to junior soccer game or something. It's
or watch TV.
Everybody assumes that somebody else is doing their job.
Mm-hmm. Yes. One of the comments is exactly, we've been conditioned to be parented by the powers that be. And,
excellent statement. Excellent observation.
It also says,
Yeah.
it's also a social taboo to challenge what's accepted. The greatest fear in our culture is the perception of insanity.
Yeah, they call somebody insane and then they win the argument now.
It used to be just that women were called crazy. That was kind of the
Right.
deal in the 50s and 60s. They'd just go, yeah, my wife's crazy, and everybody just nod their heads
You get out.
and walk away.
I have to get this guy out of here.
And now we just do it with everybody that we disagree with. It's I'm amazed in a culture where we are not supposed to denigrate people and we're supposed to use the proper pronouns, that we can still call people crazy. My theory about that is if you do the diagnosis, now it's your obligation to make sure you step in and help that person, that poor crazy person. You
look at at first I thought it was just about my stuff, but I think it's about our society, and anonymous comments on the internet where you just insult somebody, just super wicked insults, something they would never do to somebody's face because they probably get punched out, but
So there's, let's see, I've got a question here.
But they're all power words, and it's all who knows more power phrases. And
right.
That thing that we were listening to just beforehand, it was, about how this guy was sort of mixing up his buzz phrases and just throwing them out there as fast as he could as he got more desperate. A Holocaust denier, Nazi, climate control. No, climate change denial, and I forgot all the other different things he was throwing out there. Had nothing to do with the issue, but it was just insults to throw. Okay, you had another question.
The question is, Dr. Wood, if Hurricane Erin had any effect on the electrons... I'm supposed to ask if Hurricane Erin had any effect on the electrons in the atmosphere.
Oh, I have evidence that there was a charged atmosphere because the three major airports surrounding, the World Trade Center, reported thunder that day. Dry thunder. That's Newark Airport, JFK Airport, and LaGuardia airports. They all reported, dry thunder. So that's pretty good evidence of it.
The field effects.
The hurricane was close enough to cause a static field there. Whether or not that was used, I'm not jumping to that conclusion, but you can. What I do say about it is. Isn't it interesting that the hurricane, the outer bands are right at the end of Long Island. How did they know exactly when that hurricane was going to stop and turn around?
Yeah.
To the point they didn't need to even warn anybody that, like, voluntary evacuation. No, there's no mention of it.
If I can just add something on, I think it was July 22nd of 2001.
How could they be that sure? How they could be that sure?
Well, yeah, and just before that happened, Bush was talking to NOAA, which is National, hurricane? NOAA, what does it stand for? But, they're the ones that track hurricanes and do the warnings and that sort of thing. And
National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration, I think.
Right, because it has an A. I keep thinking there's an H on the end, but of course. Anyway, he was addressing them, and he was saying, we've got better tracking than ever, and we're going to really let people know about these hurricanes that are off the coast because we have, 38 million people that live on the eastern seaboard. And there's this actual speech that he gives on, I believe it was July 22nd of that year. And so Erin was the first hurricane of the season that year.
And they also studied it to death, and it was the longest lived one. It started at the end of August, and it was studied by all sorts of different universities, and they had the most data collected from it.
And the point being is, at that time, you would think that given their new dedication to tracking hurricanes, we would have heard about it on the news, at least even if it was offshore. Because look at Harvey and all these other hurricanes. You hear everything about
panic.
it. You've got it tracked minute by minute, but we heard nothing about Erin, and a lot of people don't even know it was a thing.
The thing that hits me the most is that's what the media loves, to draw people in to watch their channel. They have a special logo for the storm, and oh, look at this, so people will be glued in front of the TV set, and they just milk them for all they're worth. These kind of storms and events.
Mm-hmm. Except that one. It's kind of interesting.
Yep. And it wasn't that it wasn't important at all. It was just not mentioned. It wasn't like these images I have in my book show where the hurricane was at the moment these weather reports came out, and they didn't show a hurricane on them at all. But
and
the hurricane was
with
right
the satellite photos as well, which I find really
Yeah,
interesting.
and I superimposed where the hurricane would have been. Because what I did for the satellite image, you could trace the coast, and I could match the size and location right where the hurricane was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was.
I love about your research is that, people, when I'm talking to somebody, I can actually say with great certainty, this is how it happened. This is what it said on the satellite photos as compared to what was on NBC, for instance, because you have all the images there.
Right, and of course Geraldo, in I think it was 2010,
yeah,
it was talking about how he was celebrating 40 years of chasing hurricanes and reporting on them, and well, it says one thing: it's too bad at 9/11 we didn't have a hurricane.
Yeah, is it ironic, or is it just meant to taunt us even more? I'm not sure. I don't know.
I think it's meant to sort of reinforce something, because it says, oh, we didn't have a hurricane on 9/11. Okay, so Judy Wood's lying.
Right,
people don't go look at the evidence. It's
so
just
as soon as you come out with something, as soon as you point to something, then people will come out and put it in plain sight and then say, ha, ha, ha. Of course there was no hurricane that day. And then people just walk away instead of looking into it for themselves. Yet again, that critical thinking element missing.
Exactly. And that's the big thing, is for people to look at stuff themselves and to get in tuned with, what's around them. And not what the textbook tells you, but what you actually observe. And that's something I think that, like comes from fixing Chatty Cathy dolls or whatever as a kid, or playing with blocks and erector sets. Oh, those were among the best, because you had to plan how you're going to put it together, because you still had to be able to reach in and hold the nut in the back when you turn the screw.
Oh yeah, Meccano and all that stuff. I mean, my brothers used to put together steam engines and learn how steam worked. Strange idea.
But the erector sets, you had to figure out the order in which you were going to assemble it, so that you could access a certain place. Otherwise, you have to take the thing apart to get to where, like, to hold the nut that's behind the screw that you're turning,
right.
And things like that. And there aren't too many toys like that anymore. Even Legos, they're a digital kind of thing. You can only put them together a certain way. Mm-hmm. Whereas you have a pile of leftover wood pieces that are odd shapes. That'd be the best. Mm-hmm. You could decide how you're going to put those blocks together.
Kids are attracted to that too. If you have something that's in the cupboard and isn't meant to be a toy, there's much more likelihood that they'll go for that than something that's got a specific way it's supposed to be put together.
My dad built on a garage and back half of the house when I was little, and the leftover piece of wood he cut up into the 2x4s. He cut irregular shapes and other pieces and sanded them down and painted them, and then they're in a big bucket. Mm-hmm. Imagine that, being able to just play with those things.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like your family actually was a little bit atypical. Maybe it is typical of a lot of people in our era.
It was free toys.
Yeah,
it was free toys.
We were just turning the corner at that point, where things were like the Mattel, the dolls, the this, and it was all prepackaged. But before that, in the 50s, people were having to create their own kind of fun, like the Meccano sets or erector, whatever.
Or sewing the clothes for your doll or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Or
I grew up
building
in
a doll
family
house
like that too, very practical, and I think that's why we're so darn practical.
And if you don't have much money, just give the kids some cement blocks and some piece of plywood, and you can build a dollhouse. You get some cardboard from Amazon box or something, and you can make a nice dollhouse. Mm-hmm. It isn't about the quality of the end product. It's about the experience. In your mind, you know what it looks like, and it looks gorgeous.
That's what I do with filmmaking. And people, it's funny how many parents will come to me and they'll say, oh, I really want my son or daughter to be in the filmmaking industry. And I'm just thinking, it's not about that we're making a film. It's a process. And the end product may be something completely unintelligible if you weren't involved in the process, because it's a trial and error thing. And
I wasn't really interested in the Blair Witch Project, but I understand that one was, just kids, filming.
They were.
And creating the aura around it.
A distant cousin of mine, as it turns out, and they were actually trying to fundraise, but I think they did it on something like $2,600 or some.
I thought it was $260.
That's what it looks like, but apparently you still need to buy a good camera. Or, I don't know.
But still, so much of the stuff goes on in your head.
Right.
That's why it didn't matter that people say they look at Star Wars now and the special effects look really hokey. But that was state of the art then. And even then it was too much. But think of the old King Kong stuff. You just know what the story is. You're not grading it on their special effects. You're following the story, and it's in your mind anyway. Just kind of like reading a book.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's something that maybe that's also another thing that creates that type of connection. Yeah, exactly. It's reading a book. You have to put. That's why, I'm so adamant about keeping my book in hand read form. It's so that you can put the story together yourself. You read a paragraph, then you contemplate what it means in your life, and then you read another paragraph, contemplate, and you make the connection. It isn't like a movie is sort of pre-formatted, with the conclusion that everybody goes out with.
Right.
But a book gives you information and how exciting it is for you. Like somebody reads a love novel, some people wouldn't get excited about, but other ones would really get into it because they're reading more colorful things into it.
Yes.
And that's, I think, what's missing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is in a scientific thing, you have different pieces of data, but you're having to put them together.
Yes. And it's a difficult thing if we're being spoon-fed, if we're being parented by the government or by the TV or whatever it is that's doing the thinking for us, or the academic system, which is a sad state of affairs right now, especially when we look at the situation at Wilfred Laurier University that you pointed out to me in my own country. For those that don't know, I'm a Canadian. And Dr. Judy did point to this. I'm going to go back to that screen just so that you can see what we were talking about. I left a link in the chat for people that want to follow that and take a look at the information.
There's lots of articles, but I like that article the best because it gives you a variety of pieces of information, as well as the full audio.
Yeah, well, that's it. And I didn't actually listen to the full audio myself before we did the show. This
go
was
ahead.
something.
Can you play the one from the House of Commons? It's 1 minute 9 seconds long.
Tell me where on the page this is, because
it's
I've got
about
the
a third of the way down.
Okay, House of Commons. We've got the full. The meeting with the prof is good. I'm scrolling down the page, and for those of you that would like to listen to this, it's 42 minutes, and I'm not going to play it on air because it's quite quiet.
This is too long.
She recorded it sort of. I don't know whether she's asked to record
it. It was from her laptop. No, she wasn't. She was recording on her laptop, and I think it's her background story is that so she wouldn't have to take notes. Mm-hmm. But I think that was a smart way. She couldn't be held legally, like you're eavesdropping. But it's why it's sitting in the middle of the table, and the audio is very good. For they didn't realize they were being recorded, and when she posted it on YouTube, the bottom fell out for the administration people. They started really doing some damage control.
Right. So if you look at the top, I'm just showing the web page itself. You'll see that there's a video that if you watch the video, it's a news broadcast that will kind of be confusing if you haven't had the thing in context. So I had to go down here to this bit.
The next thing down is the audio of the whole thing.
And then now I'm trying to find the one from the House of Commons.
Okay, right below that is a picture of her, like on some mud flats.
Yes.
Okay, just below that is a video. Free speech support.
Oh, okay, good. All right. Well, I'll play that. Let's see what happens there.
It's 109. It's in the House of Commons.
Yeah. Just taking a minute to get going here.
Oral questions.
Will I be able to hear it?
Let me turn it up a little bit.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister join me in condemning the egregious crackdown on free speech at Laurier University?
You're here.
The Honourable Minister of Science.
Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to creating open spaces for Canadians to debate and express their views. In a free society, we may disagree with the person's views, but we must defend their right to hold them, unless those views promote hate. Intolerance and hate have no place in Canadian society or in our post-secondary institutions. We will continue to fight to ensure the charter rights of Canadians are upheld and that every Canadian can feel safe and secure in their community.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, I don't know why the Prime Minister can't just simply denounce what happened at the university.
There you go. Okay, let me just turn that down a little bit. There's a bit of a buzz. I think it might be the headphones. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm just letting people know that. Okay, so there's. I did play it. I think that did you hear that?
No, but I turned mine on. I muted mine and ran it. So it wasn't interesting. He wanted yes or no. Do you condemn it? This, and then she puts out this gobbledygook of implying that it was hate speech.
Exactly. Well, that's it.
The TA did.
The seed of
That's
doubt.
how you can.
Very Laurier.
Yes, it's right. It's how you can twist things. And he was just going at it directly. Yes or no? Do you condemn this business?
Now, I don't think
I guess
you've
she doesn't
actually
condemn
listened to Jordan Peterson, but you heard him referenced in this article. And
right. Yeah, they make him sound like me. Whatever you do, don't listen to Dr. Wood. She talks about laser beams from outer space and other nonsense about really crazy stuff. Don't listen to her. That reminded me of that.
Yeah, I think that the listeners might want to take a look at Jordan Peterson. Now, I'm not expecting anybody to agree or disagree. I just think it's worth a listen. He does now have a YouTube channel, and coincidentally, it's Jordan Peterson, just as it sounds, with an S-O-N.
Okay,
and
can I first insert in here what this whole thing is about? This teaching assistant, they came to the part of, it's a course in communications or something in media or whatever, and also about grammar. They were talking about grammar, and okay, do you use they in a singular sense or the plural sense?
Right.
What pronouns do you use? So there's different views because this is being discussed in the popular media nowadays. And here's an example. And it was this Peterson guy apparently having a debate. I haven't heard the thing. It was from a TV show, public television show. This Peterson guy was having a debate with somebody else about it, in doing both sides. And so the TA had just presented this as, see, it's being debated in popular media. Mm-hmm. And then afterwards, she was called in the carpet for it from her advisor and some other administration people, and they had sort of a tribunal, and they called her in, and that's when she put her laptop apparently in the middle of the table and recorded it. They didn't realize she was recording it. Mm-hmm. And they were, claiming that she had insulted or threatened students by this, and she did an excellent job defending herself.
She did, and see, if you look at this page, and again, I have the link in the chat somewhere up at the top, but if you listen to this, it's quite interesting because you hear her just being grilled, and you can hear that she's quite emotional, but she keeps it together very well. And
she explains, she says, I know, I myself, if I'm blamed for something I didn't do, and being, badgered into a corner, that's a normal human response. And so, and she just noted it, pardon my crying, but I'm pretty upset by this. Yeah, they wouldn't tell her how many. They say that's confidential, whether it's one person or 10 or whatever. I think it was probably one person, but they wanted to make it seem like 10, so they said it was confidential as to how many complained. And, basically one of the guys grilling her was saying that these children need to be coddled. They can't handle reality, even though this was on public television.
She says,
yeah, they're not children.
They said, well, they're young adults. And I'm thinking, well, if that's the case, then, you better tone everything down in terms of the university experience. And don't let them go to the bar, that's for sure.
Oh, and you don't want anybody to be upset about anything. So you have to make sure that, if you wear green or blue, that color isn't going to upset somebody in the classroom. When we were kids, it was sticks and stones will break your bones. But they're adults. And she makes an excellent point that the university should be about, testing your knowledge of things and learning how to sort things out. It's not supposed to be an indoctrination. She didn't make this statement, but I'm just summing it up. It's not supposed to be an indoctrination. It's supposed to be about how to learn how to learn. And that's something that is lacking. It has turned into indoctrination. And these guys did not like her teaching them how to think. And in the tribunal, it becomes very clear. And they go, they're so desperate. They start saying it was akin to Nazi, listen to Nazi talk or listen to Hitler talk. And then another thing about climate denial, and the guy goes into his spiel on climate denial, and saying
everything.
that it's a settled thing, and it's what's the term he uses? Something like settled, scholarly, academic, credibility. He has all these buzzwords he puts out there to make something seem like it's right. Yep. It was just a whole bunch of different things he was throwing out, and somebody else was throwing out something else. She said something, I forgot what it was. She says, so we're supposed to coddle them? She didn't use that word, it's a different word, nicer word. And the other side, just shut up. And they got caught in this big bunch of silence until somebody else brought up something and just changed the subject just to fill the air.
Well, I think it's a really good indication of where we're going and how we need to respond. And it takes a lot of guts. Yes. And sometimes, it is a difficult thing to sit in front of a bunch of people that are accusing you, especially when you're a TA and this is your professor.
She's 22 years old.
22 years old, exactly. And she's standing up to people. And I think more of us just need to actually put our money where our mouths are.
And that's why they were trying all sorts of intimidation things, the way they were talking, like she was a lowlife. And one of the other things that they brought up was saying about black helicopters, and you hang out with those people who talk about black helicopter, who are worried about black helicopters and one world government. So he's got all these buzz phrases. So what is that designed to do? Is not you are not to consider that somebody's trying to promote one world government. You're supposed to run the other way. It's like, that's a Judy Wood thing, and to get people to run the other way. like reason why, it took 10 years for people to notice that the buildings were turning to dust was because of all the ridicule I got for pointing it out. Mm-hmm. And it was something that people were not to consider under any circumstances, or they'd be ridiculed as a Judy Wood fan. And, you don't want to do that? And so it's this control by groupthink and by mob rule. Right. And he was trying all the tools he could in the book, and she was alert, intimidated or beat up, but she kept, holding herself firm. And he would try to put words in her mouth, saying, if the subject was complaining about it, then they don't have an open mind about seeing what's around them. He says, you're saying they're wrong. No, they don't have an open mind.
I'm going to approach her and see if I can have an interview with her.
But I love that comeback, because he was trying to stuff that, he was trying to get her to slip up and say the wrong thing. Yeah. So he could use that to quote her. See, she says the students were wrong. No, she wasn't saying the students were wrong. She had to keep correcting him on various things. He was trying to
brilliant. And this is the problem.
I think so. It's very clear. She's too smart for him. She ran circles around
for university. She's
she left
too
it with her
for
pants
academia.
down.
because she's going to get herself into a lot of trouble. And what I'm noticing is that there are a lot of people like Jordan Peterson, Dr. Peterson, who are starting their own channels so that they can actually get the message out, because they cannot get it out through academia, and they cannot get it out even as a tenured professor. I mean, he's got a pretty good contract there.
Yeah.
So it's
right after she posted it on YouTube, then the university president got in touch with her to apologize, and she says that she was honest. This is what I love. She was honest. She said, "Well, what else could they do?"
Yeah. No,
they got between a rock and a hard spot.
She's a very sincere person, and we need more of those people. People that
sincere
are going by
and honest,
character driven. And
it was just beautiful listening to her every bit of the way. I mean, even the fact that she started to go into tears and was trying to control that. She was a real person. Mm-hmm. And to see those guys, they were just pounding on her, thinking, "Oh, we have her now," and it was a real nasty interrogation, mm-hmm. and trying to brainwash her. And it became very clear that, free speech, as long as it's in agreement with what we want you to say.
I thought they were trying to intimidate her. Mind you, I didn't hear the whole thing, but from what I heard was, I just came to the point where he said something about if we were to suggest that you did this or that, and I'm assuming that he's asking her to step down.
Well, they're talking about white nationals and he also, he brought in white nationals and something about white supremacy. Well, if that's what she was talking about, I mean, it's using all the tools in their toolbox.
Yeah,
but
ad hominem attacks.
Right. But he said it settled at the end that she wasn't to teach the class without showing her lesson plan to them for scrutiny ahead of time.
Oh, my goodness, we've come to that.
And
now, that is a Nazi tactic, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Fascist tactic.
It was, but what became so clear, the university has to denounce these folks because, I mean, she pulled her pants down, left them down, basically, figuratively, not literally. But
we don't want to say that in this kind of climate.
Right. But it was, they were... the fact that this was recorded, they're probably going to have some policy you can't record any meeting after this. They hadn't expected that.
That's an interesting one, because I had the same thing happen a long time ago when I was having to confront somebody, and I said, because they had all their people there, and I think they had a lawyer and they had a secretary, and I said, I'm here by myself, so I've brought a tape recorder, and this is my secretary. So I actually... because you weren't allowed to have legal representation at the time. And that changed the rules so that you could have legal representation. But nobody had ever challenged it before. And man, the tone changed from the meeting before. As soon as you bring a tape recorder into the meeting. Because
that's another thing we should put on our list, along with filing police reports, is to bring tape recorders.
Yes. Well, I think
to whatever in life, it's a tool that now is so important to have. Yeah. Because how else can you prove that what somebody said?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, this is it. I think tape recorders are really great. I have a little one that I carry around with me all the time. Your phone is actually a tape recorder if you have an iPhone. So if you do find yourself in this kind of situation, I think this is what we need to be doing, using all the technology we can, or all the tools at our disposal to begin pushing back against all this insanity.
I like the way you stated that they brought their secretaries, and so this was your secretary.
Well, it seems
that's a good way to put it.
Because from the last meeting before that, they did have a secretary, and it was so biased that what she had written down absolutely didn't reflect the meeting at all, and so there was nothing they could really say about that, because I said, here are my notes, and they don't in any way jive with what you wrote down. But I think we do need to stand up to people, and that was hard for me because I was very young at the time as well, and I was taking on a pretty big entity. But
she in no way was fighting with them or attacking them. She was just trying to logically explain things. She said later on that she feels like she made a mistake, that she should have initially, right from the get-go, condemned what they're doing. Mm-hmm. But I think it made for a much better show, explaining it out how it did, because it really hung them out to dry even more. Yes. Because they could later say, oh, we misunderstood what happened. We were misinformed. That could be their escape. But after the way it went down, no way could they use any excuse.
And I don't even call that excuses. I think people have just gotten into lying as a way of life, and I think some of our leadership has encouraged that sort of thing. Obfuscation, lying, getting away with things. When we see this, it becomes normalized. And it used to be that we would not be comfortable with lying, or we couldn't, it wasn't just that we would get caught, it was that it wasn't a really great thing to do. Now people just do it as a matter of course. I don't know, at every level. Okay,
let's entertain another issue here. We don't even know if there was a student, if the number was 0 that complained.
Yeah.
Exactly. They said it was confidential, the number. Well, that's so they could say anything they wanted to say. But let's imagine that there was somebody who complained about this. What a weird thing to do. Instead of, dealing with what's there or talking to the teacher about it or something, they immediately go to the administration to tattle.
Well, that's what we're taught. Go to Big Brother.
Yeah. Yeah, that says about a failure somewhere with that person. That it's if somebody can't deal with something themselves. If you go talk to the professor and have a discussion with them about whatever the problem was, if that doesn't solve it, then you go to the next level. Mm-hmm. But or you can talk to your classmates about it or something. Right. You start at the bottom and work up. But to someone going to the administration first, someone did that actually with my showing 9/11 stuff before class. Mm-hmm. Before class. I was showing a video to somebody, and a student went to some administration about it, and I, that explained it was, I'm showing, we got to figure out what happened, because if you're in engineering and you don't care why a building failed, you need to be in a different profession. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. and that's all the administrator needed, and they were done. It's good to look, because this person didn't think I should look into it at all. There was no other problem they had except that how dare you look into what happened. Yeah. It's an insult to the injured or something. If you're an engineer, as you know, I'm known as a disaster queen. I look at when something fails. That's what engineers like to do, is why it fail, so we can make a better one that doesn't fail.
And I, for one, am really glad about that. I think that's a really good thing to do. I want to answer
and the administration was fine with that answer. The same with I used the example of the levees in New Orleans for when we were talking about hydrostatic pressure, and someone said, how dare you question that? And I said, we shouldn't look into why the levees failed. We should just rebuild them exactly like that and sit and wait for it to fail again. Yeah.
I know you want to build your house. I don't want to change the subject. I just wanted to address something that WOD is saying. WOD, I'm sorry. I've got headphones on, and it's a bit of a delay, so I apologize for that. Anyway, WOD is wondering about the California fires, and I just wanted to address that person because we did chat about it earlier and we addressed it on a previous show. Can you just give a very slight synopsis? And I don't want to go into it again, but I just want to address it and let them know that we're not ignoring them. Yeah, or what would you say as just a synoptic statement?
Here's a parallel that if the murderer drove a white car and then you have a white car parked in front of your house because a friend's coming to visit, somebody's coming to murder you. Just because it's a white car doesn't mean that everything else is identical. And why are people wanting to just jump to a conclusion without studying? I'm not saying what did or didn't happen, except for some obvious things. People who are jumping on the bandwagon of it's just like what happened to the World Trade Center. No, I could answer that one definitively, because I don't see unburned paper fluttering around in the breeze, nor did the buildings go poof into dust and the dust go straight up. And nor did people look up and see blue sky and walk out of their house that had dustified. Things burned. There was high temperature. That wasn't the case for the World Trade Center. So right there's a difference. But the biggest problem is you don't just use one piece of data and then run with it. That's that flashcard teaching that is coming through. When somebody wants a knee-jerk response, in order to understand what happened, you have to understand all of the evidence first. And that doesn't take 10 minutes. It takes a long time. I studied the World Trade Center site for several years before anyone heard anything from me. And then continued studying it. I would only speak on what I could say. But let's look at wildfires too. They're normal to some extent. I'm not saying this one was or wasn't. It's just that understand that wildfires in California are a normal occurrence. Just because there's a wildfire there doesn't mean somebody did it to us. That is the black helicopter, kind of thinking, if you want to call it that. It's just jumping to a conclusion without studying it. How many fires have you studied before? Are you a fire forensics person? And it takes a lot. One thing I like to kind of joke about the thermite people is you see a house that's burned down. Somebody tried to put it out with some garden hoses, and some buckets of water got filled up, and then so after the fire's out, he comes and looks. The investigator looks and sees a bucket of water and says, "Oh, there's a bucket of water that obviously caused the house to burn down." It's the same kind of logic. Seeing one piece of data and take it, whatever context you want with it, is not very smart. That's not what a thinking person does. And the important thing I've always said about the evidence, or like the World Trade Center, is you keep looking at the evidence, and the evidence will speak to you and tell you what happened. If you don't know what happened, keep looking at the evidence until you do. Whatever you do, see how much discipline you have to not jump to a conclusion. And so the people who are saying about California wildfires, blah blah blah, that's jumping to a conclusion. They lack discipline, and discipline is really needed. And by just jumping to a conclusion and saying, "Oh, it's just like this or just like that," you actually muddy the waters for other things.
And create an emotional response too, because you've had a couple of people
bingo.
Responding on YouTube, and it's not addressing the actual science or the forensics themselves. It's just Dr. Judy has kind of gone against her previous teaching or something. It's very
it's just into insulting, right? They don't listen to what it's about.
This person is asking about the garbage cans and the recycling cans, the bins in the houses.
Which ones? Which ones?
The one.
No, I'm saying, my point is, which garbage cans? One garbage can, two garbage cans, or hundreds that were involved? It's this cherry picking of data that people like to stake everything on. Mm-hmm. And it isn't about a garbage can. Did people walk out and look up at blue sky and walk out, of their burnt down house? Did you have unburned paper fluttering around?
Because the people in the World Trade Center did not, without getting too much into the people themselves, because that's not addressed too much in the book or anywhere else, but they didn't have the same demise as people in a house fire. Is that a good way to put it?
Well, it is covered in the book. I mean, especially when it's talking about the number of people missing that they didn't have any DNA for. In Chapter 3. You need to read Chapter 3 again. It is covered. It is covered. The fact that
I don't want to go into too much detail about the people themselves, but the demise is different.
No, but the fact that they can't account for half the people. There's no trace of them, not even DNA trace. There's no trace of them. And I think of the California fires, you had people's bodies charred. It's and also you have to look at what kind of structure it is. If it's a wooden structure, It's built out of dry wood, and trees are wet wood, so trees would burn more slowly than houses. And there's issues like that you need to think of. Also, there's a toasted car. Somebody had a picture of a toasted car in the middle, or a burnt car in the middle of the highway, and the trees on either side weren't burned. Well, if you have a fire rushing down, it's those are growing moist trees on either side. This is a different situation. You have to look at all of the data, and you can't do that with just cherry picking things and look at this video or look at that video. You have to, physically study all of the evidence.
Well, cars are more incendiary by their very nature. There you have gas in them, and a lot of those people had just filled up with gas to get out of town, too. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of variables that might make a car blow up in that way.
Yeah, and again, we're not saying one way or the other. People say, oh, she's claiming it could not anyway be, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm saying you can't make a decision based on a knee-jerk response, based on one piece of data. Like my silly example of the murder of something else that drove a white car. So therefore, if a white car pulls up in front of your house, you should call the police because somebody's going to murder you. It's a bad analogy. And the same with data from there. So I've been saying it's exactly the same as what happened in the World Trade Center. Well, where's all the dust? Where's where's all the unburned paper fluttering around that flew over to Brooklyn? And things were hot in the California fires. It was not hot in southern Manhattan.
Well, yeah.
Like the trees didn't burn next to the cars that got toasted, but it was the paper didn't burn that was between the World Trade Center and the toasted cars. It was a sea of unburned paper, and that's the easiest to burn of anything.
Right.
Is a piece of paper, and the paper wasn't burned.
That's what I noticed too. Yeah, that was the big thing. And this, I'm just putting up on the screen. I'm just going to it. There's some pictures of the wildfires that I'm just putting up on the screen right now. It's just a random image from Australia, but I find that there's some similarities there that kind of answer these questions too.
The Australian one was
weather system. A fire can be
turn into a tornado.
It turns into a tornado, which has its own dynamics as well.
Yeah, and the thing I got out of one of the videos you shared with me was this guy who's driving through to see if any people were ready to bail from their houses who hadn't left their homes. Last ditch effort because here's the fire. They drive through this thing that just looks like all sparks. These little glowing things. Big. It's like they're driving through the fire, but it's something else that's like raining down. It's pretty weird seeing how things were. But it's tremendous wind and things going. Another thing that the YouTubers would point out is the fire coming out from inside a tree. That's perfectly normal. If you've ever had a tree rot on the inside, it still grows on the outside. But chipmunks and whatever and squirrels live inside the tree, and that's dead wood. That's the dead, dried out stuff. Sure, it's going to go out and catch fire faster than the outside of the tree. So that's not surprising at all. It'd be more surprising the other way around.
I'll have to share my screen with you another time, but right now I'm just showing some images, and you can see all the houses are actually burned down, but around the houses there are all these trees. And this is just a random video that I happened to find on the Australia fire of 2009. And there is a much longer version. You can see it on this channel, or you can just search for it. But I actually posted one because I found it quite fascinating. It goes through it with the commander, the guy that's going through the fires. There's a very brave journalist that's with him, and you can hear it being described and how it unfolds. And even they're just going, this is the weirdest thing we've ever seen. And they're used to these kind of fires, big fires in Australia.
Yeah. So Joni, I got to make one comment here. Mm-hmm. See, you're doing what people are supposed to do. You're going and looking at other evidence. What do other fires look like?
It's kind of a journalistic thing, and this is what surprises me when I watch, quote, the news, because it seems like people are just editorializing what happened to Walter Cronkite, and when things got too weird for him where he wasn't believing things, he actually went to Vietnam and checked it out. that's what I call journalism. It's not this thing of opining on every single thing that comes down the pipe.
Or reading the script was handed to you. And I think a good parallel to that is the weather reports. You get a babe up there who never went to weather school, who just reads a script, on the teleprompter and points, using the, whatever you call it, blue screen thing, to mark on the projected map. But they're not engaged. They don't say, well, because of this, I know this and I know that. And we quit having that probably at least 20 years ago.
Well, you don't want to talk about the weather because a lot of it would look kind of weird based on some of the things that are going on weather-wise, but that's a whole other discussion. I'm just saying you don't want to go into it too much.
Oh, but still, those are not weathermen who are presenting the weather. Those are just script readers. Even Al Roker, who was doing the weather on 9/11 and doing some other stuff, was he was talking about the weather in that day. He's not a weatherman.
Yep, he's a TV personality. Come on.
Yep.
That's why they get paid the big bucks. These guys.
So once you realize that, you throw away your TV set. It's totally useless. Did they? I guess this TA thing in Canada, that probably hasn't been on any news, has it?
Well, I hadn't heard about it, but then I don't watch the mainstream news. I'm usually looking on YouTube or talking to people, so I just hadn't seen it. So thanks for pointing it out.
They probably wouldn't want to advertise someone thinking on their own. And she did just a magnificent job. I would love to know, did she grow up without a TV set? She definitely can stand on her own and doesn't just run with the herd. And that's precious.
I want to interview her. We should have her on our show sometime. Maybe she'd be interested. I can introduce her to your work. There's a question here. Is there a commonality between the destructive mechanism of the towers and the toasted cars? Could it be elemental?
You mean in New York City, the toasted cars and what happened to the towers?
I believe so, yes. Extremely file 911.
Let's look at the evidence. The evidence shows the towers went poof, went up into dust, and dust was so fine and went up that it blocked out 100% of the sunlight, and you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And Patrick Connolly comes out of Building 7. He tries to go in there to hide and decides that that's not going to be a safe place. And he comes out and he can't see where he's going. And thank goodness the vehicle started lighting up. And then he could see where he's going. So that gives us the time. There's no sunlight coming through, but then the cars started lighting up. So it was an after effect. Mm-hmm. It didn't happen during the dustification of the building, but perhaps when the gizmo was turned off. And then we go and look at, John Hutchison's work, who, it's parallel evidence. His stuff produces all of the same effects, including, he has this toy boat in a pan of water, and when he has his gizmo turned on, you see the water droplets jumping up. There's sort of a levitation of them. And then he turns it off, and you see the water droplets, immediately settle down, and you have still calm water. And then the boat lights up with looks like spontaneous combustion. And he does it several times, and it's right after he turns the gizmo off that the fires light up. And that's been said a lot about some ball lightning, as well as lifters. People have a lifter going on, a charge thing going on in their study, for or their lab for a couple of days, and then they turn it off, and a fire appears where the thing had been. Right. It's like a disequilibrium happens. But that seems to be the direction to look in, because you were talking about parallel evidence. Because Patrick Connolly's testimony, that's one I like the best. He towers are coming apart. He runs for cover. He's going to go into Building 7, and he decides that's not safe. It comes out, and he says, "You can't see where you're going. You can't see your hand in front of your face." And thank goodness the cars started lighting up. And he was walking up West Broadway, and the cars were lighting up, but just about as he was passing them. and he got up to forgot which street it was. It's on page, I think, 132 in the book. And then he made a left turn there, and I've got pictures of those very cars lit up. That's the corner where he turned and went the other direction. Mm-hmm. And you look at those cars, and there's unburned paper all around them. And you look at the aerial view and the helicopter view, and there's no debris on the roofs, and there's nothing else is looks like it's on fire. I have to stress, looks like it's on fire. We don't know if it's real fire or what it is. Could be, what do you call it? Charged particles. But you see no burning paper around these vehicles. But one thing is clear is the vehicles are up on rubber tires. If there was an atmospheric charge going on and the cars got more charged, they couldn't discharge through the tires. And John Hutchison had said something of his stuff like that too. If the stuff that wasn't grounded had a worse fate than stuff that was, and stuff that gets levitated, has problems. But but usually you get lift or disruption. Depending on what frequency or whatever he was dealing with, you get one or the other. And you have the police cars that were flipped over. They look perfectly okay, except they're flipped upside down. And then you have toasted cars right next to them that call it disruption, but they weren't levitated. So it's interesting how that was.
Yeah, somebody was asking about the luxury cars and ambulances that are made of, usually made of aluminum, and in those pics they didn't really get toasted. But I'm not sure that there's a correlation there.
No, but the correlation I can see with the ambulance is the one that was parked in front of Tower 1. I know that when the ambulances park, they have oxygen bottles on them, and they have people who might have heart problems, and they're gonna shock the people to bring them back or something, or give them oxygen. And I know with my car, when I'm driving along, I park someplace and I get out to shut the door. You can see it kind of arcs over, a big snap of static electricity. So there's a relative different charge between the car and the ground. You couldn't have that. You wouldn't want to have that with using oxygen. So they drop a chain to ground the ambulance.
Right.
And I think that
it's such a simple concept, really.
But looking at the pattern of it, you see, street signs weren't toasted.
Yeah.
But the vehicles next to them were. The buildings weren't, but the vehicles were. And the vehicles especially, are up on nice rubber tires. Now let's look at the World Trade Center. Sure, it's grounded, but it's a long distance to the ground. It's not ground in all directions up at the top. It's just ground in one way. And, perhaps that could be why it started at the top and went down. But it could be also why Stairway B was the last to go. Remember how the spire that hung on for a little while afterwards? Mm-hmm. Like 700 feet tall. And I bet you that was the top of Stairway B where those people survived.
Right.
And
that's a weird one.
I think it was just better grounded, and somebody who showed me how they were hunkered down in the stairway showed that they were touching the kick plate, the metal kick plate at the bottom. They're grounded.
Right. There's still a question about the aluminum factor. Somebody said, aren't the street signs made of aluminum? Do you think that in any way has anything to do with it?
I don't see that. I don't see that as being a very strong component. Same make and model of cars might be affected the same way because of some way they're grounded or within themselves or something. Like that police car we saw where the front of the car is totally toasted, the back looks pristine. And I'm willing to bet the rubber grommet around the door, it's very isolated between the front and the back door, so that if one area is totally isolated from the grounding versus the other, And so perhaps they also have a chain that drops in the back. I don't know that, but you got to look at all patterns, not just this material, that material. Like even door handles, whatever material they're made out of, they're probably kind of isolated from the rest of the car.
Was there not the thing I was referring to earlier about the electronic system? I thought that
they're not. Let me note, they're not melted. They're not melted. They're more like dustified. They're just gone.
They're disappeared, which means that the trunk, the boot, was lifted up. Like on all of those cars, it seemed like they were missing the lock, and on the doors as well.
Or we don't know when somebody popped a trunk lid or something, but what I'm talking about is you don't see metal dripping down from someplace. It wasn't like something was hot and melted it. Mm-hmm. It's just gone. Right. Maybe the rivets that put it on failed. Who knows? But it's a pattern. So finding a pattern is important, but assuming what the cause is not a good idea. Right. This is probably a really good example of not letting yourself get confused by it. Just recognize a lot of them have missing door handles. There's a lot of different things, but it could be the material. It could be that it's isolated from grounding. It could be that it's wired into some electronic door latch. There's a lot of different. You just look at the differences. Why? But it is interesting. The same make and model were similarly affected. And I think it just shows that something is similar between them. Don't immediately jump to the type of material in the engine or whatnot. That probably won't get you anywhere, because you can't really. There's not enough data to draw those kind of conclusions, because each location, every single car wasn't completely toasted. Some were here, some were there. So it's like, if the car was here, maybe it was going to get affected. Yes or no, get affected. Or if it was over here, it wasn't going to get affected no matter what it was made out of. Mm-hmm. Parked on the other side of the street or whatnot. Except West Broadway, every single car was affected in some way. Mm-hmm. May not have been completely, toasted, but it was affected in some way. No car along that street was pristine, which is quite interesting. Unlike the toasted car lot, some cars were okay there. They just covered with dust.
Right. Yeah. So I think what the lesson here is, when we're looking at various things, phenomenon, whether it's the California fires or bridges that are out or anything, it might even be good to jot down some things that you see, like stop the video, take a look at things. Patterns,
and then see how the pattern continues, and don't just place it on one piece of evidence. Mm-hmm. Like that's because the engine was made out of such and such. Just look at patterns and resist as hard as you can. Resist jumping to a conclusion, because if you have a lot of discipline and can resist that, the answer will come to you. And the answer will be screaming in your face, and then you have the right answer. If you're just jumping to a conclusion and then you see everything in that light, humans are emotionally driven, and they have trouble backing that out. And that's why the airplane story on 9/11 still sticks in people's minds.
It's amazing. I find it just amazing. I was, intelligent people who know so much about the rest of the world, as far as finances or politics or something.
You get an engineer who, say, how can an airplane wingtip, aluminum wingtip, make a slice through a steel column?
Well, it did. All I know is I saw it. And then people will jump to this other thing. Are you saying that people didn't see planes? And I'm sort of going back and saying,
no, they think they saw planes.
They didn't say planes. I'm just saying, think about what you do know, which is an airplane can go off the end of a runway, and the whole nose is dished in. And yet,
think of the Perry Mason shows where he has somebody come in the back of the room. Is that who you saw? Oh yeah, that's who it was. And then the person takes off a wig, and that was my secretary.
Right. You go back and watch those shows.
Yeah, and that's if you want somebody to believe something, it's the power of suggestion. It's so strong. So, people are going to think they saw planes even if they didn't, but I'm sure there was something there that looked like it could be a plane, but it didn't make the sound, because only if somebody's looking up did they see it. Right. And then they start thinking, I must have heard it, so then pretty soon in their memory, they've made up a sound to it. But the most hilarious thing, not hilarious, but it was awesome recording I have, is just before 9 o'clock, no, 10 o'clock, just before Tower 2 went poof, it was still standing. There's a guy who was in the building across the street, in Bankers Trust. He called into CBS and says, "Yeah, I saw the plane. I saw the building. Sorry, didn't mean to say that. I saw the building explode and beams were coming out of the building." And then he goes, "Oh, wait a minute." And he turns up his radio. His radio says something about a plane. He goes, "Oh, plane? Oh, yeah, I saw parts of a plane coming out the window of the building." He didn't see it until he heard on the radio that was what would happen. Then pretty soon he saw it. He's not lying. This is the reason people can recover from strokes and brain injuries, because they incorporate normalcy around them and fill in the gaps. And that's why, I say people's memories aren't like Memorex. Why you can't recall what happened to you X number of years ago. Why there needs to be a statute of limitations, because people's brains are not like Memorex. But to see it right live, this guy who called into CBS, he saw the building explode across the street and saw beams from the building shooting out. He goes, wait a minute. Oh, those are parts of the airplane wing that were shooting out. Right. But you could hear the radio in the background, and they said an airplane had hit the building. He didn't know an airplane hit the building. Right. But now he believed an airplane hit the building, and then he believed he saw parts of the wing.
And what do you think that the ego side of us plays into this as well? We've believed something, and it's very hard for us to unravel that and go back to another idea, to entertain other concepts after that.
It's more than just ego. It's like it shakes your world. I mean, I know I must have seen this, because the alternative is unthinkable. And so that also plays tricks on people's memories. So if you can repeat the official story over and over again on the TV set for 48 hours, you've got it made. Mm-hmm. And it's too bad they didn't play. If they played it over and over again, that segment of George Stephanopoulos and Peter Jennings, Peter Jennings says, "George, Jackie Judd and others have been asking, where'd all the rubble go?" "Well, Peter, I've been asking folks that." One volunteer, Robert Verlinsky, explained it all fell down into the ground, was pulverized, evaporated. If they played that over and over again, people would say, where'd the building go?
Kind of like you did when you wrote, Where Did the Towers Go? For those that are in the audience and you don't have a copy of Where Did the Towers Go, you need to go over to wheredidthetowersgo.com, or you can actually go to Dr. Judy Wood to find out of .com for more information, because that was the original website that has all of the images and basically the book as an overview. But you really do need to read the book. You need to have a book in your hands, and
the book isn't an overview. The book isn't an overview. The book has a lot of detail. If you read the book from beginning to end, it shows you the evidence. It walks you through the evidence, and it becomes undeniable. That it couldn't be this, it couldn't be that, it couldn't be that. Something else happened. There's a technology out there that can turn buildings into dust in midair. Because, it's undeniable that most of the building turned into dust in midair. Mm-hmm. Therefore, a technology exists that can do what was done. That's real simple. You don't need to give the serial number of the gizmo. You just know, here's what happened. Therefore, it's possible for it to happen because it happened.
Right.
And people who want to sway public opinion say, well, you've got to. They start setting some other bars, saying you've got to give us the serial number of it, and where this thing was tested, and where, all these requirements. You mean somebody isn't going to come out with a new weapon without knocking on your door and saying, would you like to come observe it being tested?
Right. Well, I think that's a really good starting point for people who want to engage in this conversation generally that might not have all of the information. You don't need to have all the details. You don't need to be a scientist or an engineer to see with your own eyes that there was a building that wasn't
Mostly
there
turned to
after
dust.
8 seconds.
Mostly turned to dust.
Mostly turned to dust. And
8 seconds. 8 seconds for Tower 1. That it can't even fall in that amount of time. Yeah,
So,
as
right,
a solid object, as solid objects, it can flutter down, the dust in the breeze. And it doesn't go thud when it hits. But the seismic signal only lasted for 8 seconds, and it was only surface wave. No S wave or P wave, which, if a building's crashing to the ground, a truck, hitting the ground hard, going over bumps, kabumpity bumpity. You've heard dump trucks going down the road like that. That would have shown up. That would create an S wave or a P wave. But there was no detectable S wave or P wave with any of the events in Manhattan on 9/11. Yeah, there were blasts in quarries, so you knew the recorder was working. It picked up those. Out in Pennsylvania, some blasts in quarries. Even the Fox Islands, part of the Aleutian Islands, had an earthquake, and just before Building 7 went poof. But you don't see Building 7 going poof. It didn't even create much of a surface wave. It was 0.6 on the Richter scale.
So these are the kinds of things that, without going into some sort of an argument situation, you can just ask the question even, have you ever seen the seismic waves that were generated? Have you ever looked into that? And I think these are the things that help us to not go into this sort of rhetorical ad hominem.
Did not.
Back and
You're
forth.
stupid.
It's very hard to disagree with something that you have evidence for. So you just keep going back to the evidence and don't get emotional about it. And that's something that's worked for me. It's actually helped me to learn how to have a discussion with somebody who is disagreeing. Because if you are confident in your position, then you should have some evidence that will actually help people to understand. It's not about winning. It's about learning and educating ourselves first and then other people hopefully as well.
Yeah, the buildings didn't burn up, nor did they slam to the ground. Most of the building turned to dust in midair. Now, what about the airplanes? Well, airplanes can't do that. Real airplanes can't, and neither can fake airplanes. So arguing about airplanes is a distraction from the fact that most of the building turned to dust in midair, and there's a technology out there that can do that. Now, what are we going to do with it? Supply free energy, clean energy to the world. That's a possibility. But not if somebody wants to control others.
Well, this person, Ben Cusimano 1, says Dr. Wood needs to provide a working theory as to how this was done, by who and why. Her examination of the evidence is impeccable, but going on 17 years later, she needs to push the conversation forward. What do you say about that?
Oh, I've come the closest to anybody of determining who did it. If people had supported my legal case, would have had someone in the witness stand who knows who did it. And it was dismissed by the judges who said in the written decision that they had to ignore the law to dismiss the case. So if you bet if there was a whole lot of people out in the lobby of the hearing supporting this case, they couldn't have gotten away with that. But only 2 people were there because the rest were controlled by the truthers. And the truthers, if you said anything about this case, you were banned from Richard Gage's group. Things like that. So that's how they kept the lid on it.
Well, to say nothing of the threats to your life in even putting this forward. And I think that at least now we have a situation, some of you may know about George Webb, who's doing an incredible investigation, and it's the fact that we have things like YouTube and this ability to get other people engaged, and it's almost strength in numbers at this point. You were working completely on your own based on a rather naive idea that you were going to be able to have people understand this and get on
they
board.
can if they look at it. They can if they look at it. You know, it's people are denying facts. You know, the seismic signal, non-existent. There was no detectable. I got to use the right words. No detectable S wave or P wave for any of the events. Now, how do you explain that? You have two 500,000-ton buildings supposedly slamming to the ground, and it's like slamming on a tuning fork, and the tuning fork didn't ring, didn't shake at all. You know, you got to explain that. The only way you can is that the building turned to dust before hitting the ground. The majority of it did. Also, things like the tipping top of Tower 2 that appears to stop tipping. And the only way you can rectify that with the conservation of angular momentum is that it was no longer a single unit. It was now itty bitty little particles that could keep rotating, but not the whole thing as a rigid body. There's just a whole lot of pieces of evidence to look at. For those who say, well, you know, why did you go after pointing? You have a theory about you can't accuse somebody of a theory, and I don't have the evidence in my hand, but I know who does have the evidence, and it's their job to have the evidence. And if the case had gone forward, they would have been put under oath.
Well, it's
so the fact that people did not support that case is what was so destructive about covering up the truth.
And it's time now to get people involved, and that's one of the reasons I personally want to do this show on a regular basis, and I'm so thankful that you're willing to take the time to go over this and to answer people's questions. It's something that we need to invite our friends to come into.
Also, the who part, fighting the who part isn't really all that important. So this guy pushed the button. Okay, take him out of the loop, and you got 10 more lined up behind him who can push the button.
Mm-hmm. It's not just one person that came up with this. I mean, it's a joint effort, and call it what you will.
And the importance is not in the who, but that this technology exists, and that is the problem. It exists. It's out there.
And
now what are you going to do about it?
As you say, it can split the world in half.
But also, the effect of the amount of energy, and I think Tesla was also saying stuff like that. But people are, again, this knee-jerk response, conditioned response of, oh, what about North Korea and their nukes? Well, if you know that such a technology exists, you don't need to worry about nukes. Mm-hmm. This thing could dustify a nuke and transmute it in midair, if that was the issue. But it's used as a excuse, as a distraction, all sorts of things. Which I think is partly why all this talk about Muslims after 9/11, and then now especially again, and talk about giving Iran nukes. I really wonder if they're trying to get people to because here, terrorists, Muslims, total devastation of the towers. Pile collapse Muslims. Right. Say that enough times that anything, in the future. And I was wondering, what is this deal about Congress signing, changing the Constitution or ignoring it and making a new rule that it would take 2/3 of Congress to stop this Iranian thing rather than to agree with it. Reversing it, which is kind of bizarre. And so what is this about? And nobody really complaining much about it. It's, I think, so they want to have all this attention directed at Iran, so that if something happens again, they can blame Iran. Mm-hmm. Easily, So justify another town and say, oh, Iran must have shot a nuke at them.
Yeah. those
They
bad guys.
condition people. They
Yeah, well,
condition people into that.
It's like comic book characters. We've got, the good guys and the bad guys, and we just bring them in whenever we need to have a narrative.
And that's the knee-jerk response. People aren't going to stop and say, wait a minute, why do we have all these toasted cars? Why did the building get turned to powder? In some other city. They get so conditioned to follow the bouncing ball that they don't stop and think. And that's what we really need to do, and that's our survival out of this, is to each independently think and say, yo, hold it. Whoa, Nelly. Got a problem here. Look at this.
Sorry, that would be a really good place. We're going to have to wrap it up pretty soon. I
Yeah.
would like to actually, at a certain point, come to the end. I think we could talk all day and all night about this. But we do have one question about page 370 at the top of the page. Continued from the previous page, limited metallurgical examination. FEMA reports evidence of a severe high-temperature corrosion attack on the steel, including oxidization and sulfidation.
That's the conclusion of this. You said page 370?
This is what he says, or she says, page 370, top of the page. Continue from the previous page.
Yeah, see, that's a description of something that somebody else did. Let's see. Biderman did. And that was his conclusion. That's not my conclusion.
Mm-hmm. So now I'm just wondering, is this person...
See, notice that's an inset part. It's not the full width of the page. Mm-hmm. The below that first paragraph, how does something melt only between grain boundaries? That's what I ask.
Is this person actually asking about the corrosion itself, the oxidization and sulfidation? Because that is not necessarily as it appears either, because there's some of the other phenomenon at work here as well, with the quick oxidization. The quick rusting of the materials.
Yeah, it's selected data. This was their interpretation. I'm guessing, I'd like confirmation from them, but I'm guessing that this is a Stephen Jones talking point, that they're talking about eutectic region. That's why I brought it up, even, because it's they're showing this and then saying it's from high heat. But how do they know? And that's why I asked the question. Okay, how does something melt only between grain boundaries? Figure C8 is very similar to Figure 384, discussed in the same authors in another publication. So I'm questioning that. Biederman, came up with this conclusion, but that's their conclusion. It's not mine. And notice that is a quoted thing.
I enjoy going through all of this because it's a learning experience every time. No matter how many years I hear you talking about this. It's just a way of thinking that kind of goes into your head and into your heart and into your mind, so that you start to be able to reason in every area of your life, not just with something like 9/11, which is a pretty major thing to be able to focus on. But even when I was having a conversation yesterday about something political, I didn't get emotionally involved. I went back to what is your evidence. I was able to turn the tables on the other person. And it's such a good question because people are not used to that. And even if they're good, thinking people, well, this person was telling me that I wasn't thinking. And I said, well, how about we start with the evidence then? And just compare notes in that way. And there was dead silence. So
yeah, like this eutectic region thing is something that Stephen Jones would mention a whole lot of, and people would have a knee-jerk response like that was proof or something. They didn't know what it was proof for, or how it was proof. But but the way he presented it was proof. It was proof. And I'm asking just, how do you get only melting between grain boundaries? That's an important question to ask. If they're going to claim that that's melting between grain boundaries, how do you get that from, like, conventional heat?
And I'm assuming you haven't gotten an answer that really answers that question. It may be an answer, but it's not really. There's
an answer that it's not conventional heat, because you can't get
I'm just
this
talking
grade
about from the other person. I mean, I know that you have put
right,
forward
but that's
answer.
Right, that's the statement I put in here. How can you get can something only melt between the grain boundaries? In through the thickness of a piece of steel. It makes no sense. But see, people listening to Stephen Jones wouldn't realize that. Oh, Jones says thermite did it, so it must be thermite, military grade thermite. Okay, what does thermite have to do with what happened to buildings? They don't ever answer that question.
Well, I've got running in the background, I've just had one of your presentations, and we're right there at the dustification as the building comes down. And I think it's the pole, like, what do we call that? You know exactly what I'm talking about, but I can't say it. But the justification of the spire, I think it's the spire on the top of the
that's
building.
what people are calling it. It's just that, those the stairway B thing that just kind of lingers for a little bit, and then you see it frothing up, and then it foams up, and then it goes away.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is encourage people to return, bring some other people if they have questions. We do have a nice positive response here. It says, "This is one of my favorite things ever. Thank you, ladies, for doing this. I hope you know how much your voices of reason are needed and valued." And I do appreciate that, because I think this is what we need from a lot of people, is the voice of reason. And I'm just hoping that this inspires people to go out and take up the challenge of engaging people. I'm not saying necessarily over Thanksgiving dinner. We don't necessarily have to ruin everything.
And remember, this isn't arguing about the answer. It's about discussing the evidence and where the evidence leads. Rather than, okay, what's the answer? What's the answer? Was not. Was two. Did not. Did two. You don't get anywhere. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the answer is 27. I know it is. To what? Right. You got to know what problem you're solving first before you can solve it.
Exactly.
And that's the easiest way cover-ups work, is to get people to assume a problem, because then they never look at the real problem. And you do that by getting them to argue about the answer.
Argue about the answer, exactly. And I do like that 27 analysis or analogy, because that's exactly what we do unconsciously. We don't even realize that we're doing it, or we get sucked into doing it. And we have to start with what we know, know what we know. And
know what we know that we know that we know. And know that everything else you don't know.
Well, I have a final comment here. It says, "Thank you for doing these, and thank you, Dr. Wood, for being a voice for evidence," which is a great way of putting it. A voice for evidence, and that is really what you are. You just keep going back to that. No theories here. It's all about evidence.
And if you can't get to the final answer without speculating, well, then you don't have an answer.
Speculation, pure and simple.
Yep, and
we can do that all day.
Like the Casey Anthony thing. They didn't solve what happened.
If you want to do speculation, you do what I do. I often go to a restaurant, and if I'm with somebody, we have a game where we go, "Gee, I wonder if those people met on Plenty of Fish. Maybe they met on Match.com. Maybe it's their first date." We love to do that as a little game. It's kind of fun for a while, but it's boring when it comes to real life situations, life and death situations like 9/11.
Well, it's not useful.
It's a game.
And it actually it's probably not the best practice, because then you lose the discipline.
That's true. I slack off, but it's my form of humor.
Yeah. If you do it for good humor.
Oh yeah, you got to be with somebody that totally understands your basic premise is humor here. But some people, you go along the road and you're going for a walk or something, and I swear that 90% of the conversations are about, and then he said, and then she said. Well, it's a lot about other people, and it's not really
And
in-depth
so and so
conversation.
said, and
So-and-so
yeah, it's
said.
hearsay.
So let's start talking about things from our own perspective based on our own investigation and what we know, and when it comes to politics and all that sort of thing as well. I mean, it's all important. So I will say goodbye to you on air, and I will be in touch. And I'm so thankful for everybody that tuned in today, and I'm hoping that we gain momentum and that you go out this week and just practice looking at these images. Go over some of Dr. Judy's, if you don't have the book, go over some of the videos, but I do hope that you get the book and go through it methodically from beginning to end. And
It's like, what do you see in this picture? Yeah, what do you see in this picture? Rather than developing a knee-jerk response to the picture, say, what do you see in the picture?
Right, okay. I'm going to answer a couple of these things off air. I think there's somebody that wants to send a sequence made. What I would suggest, if you want to send anything, if you have a YouTube account, which I assume you do, if you can upload it and just send a link to me at Character Driven at my YouTube channel, just message me. Then I also have a Twitter account, and it's at TipsOK, TIPSOKAY, TipsOK, double entendre yet again there. So if you want to send something that way, you can as well. And we will be back, God willing, the creek don't rise, next week on Saturday. As you can tell, we're not exactly, it's around 1 o'clock, and hopefully Stephen will join us one of these times. He is working at his gallery on Saturdays, and he is a busy man, but he does say hi, and he wants me to let everyone else know that he's sorry he couldn't be here today. So that's about it. Do you have any last closing words?
No, except to know what the difference between your thoughts and pre-programmed knee-jerk responses.
Very good. Okay, thanks everybody. Happy Thanksgiving weekend, if that's what you're celebrating, and we will talk to you next week. Bye-bye.